Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Aviva Gaskill. Welcome back to BetMeADate.com. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Josephine Shih, a professor at St. Joseph's University and also a practicing clinical psychologist who sees patients on social anxiety and how that can affect dating. Do you live with social anxiety or know someone who does and know that it affects their dating? Then this video is for you. Don't forget to subscribe to Bet Me a Date's YouTube channel for more on overcoming dating challenges. And remember, we release new content every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. I'm Dr. Aviva Gaskill. I'm a clinical psychologist who's helped dozens of people overcome dating challenges, including social anxiety and dating. But I can't do this work alone. I do it with the help of experts like Dr. Josephine Shih. All right. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Josephine Shih from St. Joseph's University about social anxiety and how that can affect dating. And we'll talk a little bit about self-esteem as well. Dr. Shih, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So, I am a clinical psychologist by training. I'm also, as you said, a college professor at St. Joseph's University. I tend to specialize in treating anxiety disorders and depression and working with young adults and adults.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about social anxiety? Can you define it for us and tell us a bit about it?
Sure. So, social anxiety is exactly what it sounds like. It is when people feel anxious in social situations. The anxiety is oftentimes accompanied by thoughts of, what do they think of me? What if they're judging me? What if they think I'm boring? What if I do something embarrassing? Or do I look super nervous to people? I must be turning bright red right now. So, not surprisingly, when people think these thoughts, they're going to be even more self conscious and even more anxious. And so it's really a negative cycle that can escalate. And it's not surprising then that people will want to avoid social situations. So I think perhaps with the exception of extroverts, most people can relate to some form of social anxiety
Yeah.
in some specific situations, be it public speaking or meeting new people. That said, for a subgroup of people, the anxious feelings are so strong and experienced across a variety of situations that it causes a lot of distress and problems in their social life, in their work life, or even daily life. And in that case, they can meet criteria for social anxiety disorder. And
Mhm.
around 7% of people in any given year suffer from social anxiety disorder.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was reading more about social anxiety, it looked like, especially between the ages of 18 and 44, it's like almost 10% of people. So it really sounds like it can affect dating quite significantly for like a lot of people who are single.
For sure.
Um, how about how does social anxiety and how does self-esteem affect dating?
Sure. I think it's interesting. I think from the outside, the impact looks the same, right? Which
Mhm.
is that people avoid going on dates or they force themselves to go, but they suffer through them, or they suffer after the date by ruminating about all that they feel went wrong with the
Yeah,
date. So
they
because
replay it in their heads over and
yeah,
over again.
yeah. And the thing is that if that's what going on dates is like I can see why people don't want to go, right?
Good
Um,
point. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the biggest impact is that people tend to want to avoid going on dates in that
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so what about what are, I guess, some of the differences between self-esteem issues and social anxiety? Tell us a little bit more about how each one of those separately affects dating differently.
Yeah. So I think, I know I mentioned that on the outside, the impact of social anxiety and self-esteem might look the same and that people are avoiding um, going on dates. But I think the strategy that I would recommend and strategies that we would recommend using to address them are actually different.
Hmm.
I'm going to kind of just start with self-esteem first.
Yeah.
Um, so I think people in general have a tendency to look for information that fit with how they see themselves.
Yeah.
So if someone is going to a situation where they tend to doubt themselves, or they tend to have low self-esteem, they're going to notice and over interpret um, situations, um, you know, in a way that sort of they feel is evidence of
Hmm.
their so low self-esteem, or that the way they think is true and correct.
Hmm.
So for example, they may miss that, hey, the other person actually smiled at them and seemed
Hmm.
interested and curious about them, right? Or
Hmm.
if they experience that, they might sort of explain it away.
They
um,
kind of pick up on the negative cues, but not the positive ones.
Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And then, yeah. So if there's like a pause in the conversation, then they're like, oh, like, I'm boring, there's something wrong. And that's why the
Mm.
conversation faltered. So really kind of picking up um, on the negatives. Um, so if you think that way, it's not going to feel very good. And it's no
Mhm.
wonder they want to avoid going on dates.
Yeah.
So the strategy here is actually that they should go on dates. But practice noticing the positives.
Yeah.
It's going to feel really unnatural at first, but I would say, try to come up with at least 3 good things that happened on the date. So, did the other person make eye contact and seem interested? Did the two of you find something in common? Did you manage to have a conversation even though it was a topic that you're not interested in or you're not familiar with? Right?
Mhm.
That's a good thing. That's successful.
Mhm.
So all of those things are good. And I think noticing and reviewing the parts that went well are important so that a person can really have a more complete picture of their experience rather than just kind of remembering the negatives. And
Mhm.
hopefully over time, they can then adjust how they see themselves to be more realistic and more positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Stick around for more of Dr. Shi's insights and expert advice on overcoming social anxiety in dating. And so that's so interesting. So, what about with social anxiety? What are different ways that you might encourage someone to handle that on a date?
Yeah. So, the recommendation is the same, which is to go out there and date. But I think in terms of strategies to do that, I would recommend that someone who feels anxious
Mhm.
about going on dates, to do it in a graduated manner. So if you're anxious about social interactions and how you will come across on a date, again, you should go on lots of dates so you actually have data points to really show yourself that kind of the disasters that you imagine conjure up in your mind, right? Like don't actually happen.
Mhm.
Um, and what I mean by doing in a graduated way is that you may start by having a text conversation or having a short telephone conversation with people before meeting them in person. Um, you may date people that you're interested in and are curious about, but are less intimidated by.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I'm kind of saying, like, just like you don't want your first job interview or second job interview to be your dream job,
Yeah.
right? It feels like stakes are so high. You want to have a lot of, practice job interviews, similar jobs with similar jobs first. So it's really the same thing with dating, get some practice under your belt.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I have a friend, I mean, we talk about exposure a lot, right, with
Mhm.
anxiety as psychologists and doing exposure type treatments. And I have a friend who used to go on, he didn't have social anxiety or anything, but he, would go on job interviews all the time, like informational interviews and job interviews, even though he wasn't looking for another job,
Yeah.
just because it helped him lose the fear factor and sort of be a little bit more natural so that when his dream job did come along,
Yeah.
he could get that job and also just to know what's out there. And I feel like that's a big part of it too. So this is so
Yeah.
helpful. Do you have any final tips for us? Any other things that you think can be helpful for people either living with social anxiety or self-esteem issues in dating?
Yeah, sure. So, I don't actually know the statistics on this, but I imagine, and people can place bets and guesses, but I imagine really a high percentage of dates do not go spectacularly
Yeah.
or what kind of romantic movies make them out to
Yeah,
be.
most people are not meeting their dream partner on date number one that they've ever been on. Like, that's not happening.
Exactly. So I'm just putting this out there, to set everyone's expectations to be much more reasonable, right? It's highly unlikely that you're going to meet someone who's like the perfect match with you the first time you try, or maybe even the 10th time you try.
Yeah.
So, people have different interests, different values, different priorities. So it's really important to calibrate expectations and see that going on a date with someone and deciding that you don't click or don't have chemistry with them, that's still a successful date,
Yeah.
right? So you have figured out that this person is like perhaps not the person for you, and it's time to date some more. So your chances of meeting your someone gets higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or someone with that
So
kind of personality. It's interesting. I was thinking about doing an episode on like cold calling and what cold calling can teach us about dating. Cause I think it's really about, in some ways, like it can be about volume, like the number of people that you see, so that you don't start internalizing it to yourself as much, that you can sort of go like, this is just hard and this is just difficult.
yeah, I mean, I feel like in some ways, internet dating has helped, right? Like if you think about like two people who, love to read books and watch movies at home, it's like, how are you going to like meet each other, like two nobodies, right? And so I do think that internet dating has helped in terms of like helping people find each other, but still like it really is a numbers game, right? Like you have
Yeah.
to meet a lot of people to potentially meet the person that is like a really good match with you on a different a set of different levels.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, I hope the tips that I have talked about here are helpful. I guess I would add that if people are finding that they're kind of white knuckling through the dates and the dates don't get easier the more that they try, or if it's hard for them to kind of like take that first step, that they usually tend to avoid talking to people at parties, they hide in bathrooms, or leave early, it may be helpful to get professional help to address social anxiety.
Yeah.
There are treatments out there that research has shown to be effective. And so I would recommend looking for psychologists who specialize in exposure-based treatment, behavioral treatments, or cognitive behavioral therapy. So yeah, so I would recommend kind of using like find a therapist feature. They usually have like a button like that at psychological associations. And the ones that I would recommend are abct.org and adaa.org. So it's Anxiety and Depression Associations of America and the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies.
And we will provide those links below in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people who are interested in finding out more about you, your research, your work, but also about your clinical practice where you see patients, where can people find out more about you?
Sure. So I am listed as the faculty members on the St. Joseph's University website. So if they go to sju.edu and look under psychology, they can find me. And I think I do link to my private practice there. I kind of explain, the scientist practitioner model and how really kind of doing research helps me understand, what sometimes to try in treatment and also, what I see there give me inspiration for what I do on research. So they can find me there. And also my website's just my name. So it's www.josephineshih.com.
Awesome. And we'll link that below as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Shih.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
If you liked what you saw here today, please subscribe, like, check us out on betmeadate.com to see more about overcoming dating challenges.